Yeah.
So
So
as I
today,
w- self-publishing and the vasectomy.
this is what we're going to talk about today. Since we've got this gigantic sword here, ready to cleave everything.
How you doing,
Uh,
Carson?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good.
We're
So
both
we're
we're both chasing children around now.
yeah, and so we thought we'd take refuge with the giant sword.
Yeah, this
Uh,
actually feels really good right now.
this is a panel from the first installment of Berserk. Is that right? The very first one?
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be like not just the first collected edition, but the first
Yeah,
story, I think.
actual
Yeah.
monthly story. And when we were flipping through the omnibus, we noticed that there were some reproduction issues with the first story, so it seemed like this would be a good way to go in terms of our panel recreation. I see
And
that
this
you
is
got.
just a really nice, like big. Ooh, I got a wobbly sword all of a sudden. It's a nice big image. It's something I feel like we can do in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah,
It's pretty iconic, I think, for people who are. I would imagine this is one of the ones that they, you know, longtime fans go back to because it's one of their early exposures.
would you show us the back of your big sword there,
The
so people
back of
can
my
see exactly how it is that you're able to rule a line with a ruler
oh
with ink.
the back of the ruler. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got cork and tape on it, so
Mm-hmm.
that's a good point. Especially, I think I'm going to use the dip pen to rule off because it's really hard to tell because the we're working on blue, and then that blue is being printed from a scan of a really bad reproduction, which is why we're doing it because then we can make the comparison of this is kind of what we think it should have looked like versus what it wound up printing like. But I think there's also a very thin line outlining the sword here. I don't think
Yeah.
it's just the hatching creating the difference. And when I do that with the ruler, I'll do it with the 102 pen, and
Right.
that could be very dangerous because the ink will get up underneath it. So that Sean's calling out, just showing that there's a cork on here, and then I've actually gone and put a couple layers of artist tape on there as well to bump it up even higher, so that the edge of the ruler rides
Right.
above the paper enough that the ink doesn't get under there.
And if you are a poor cartoonist who doesn't have such fancy pants things as a cork backed ruler, you can take a normal metal ruler. I wouldn't use anything other than a metal ruler for this. And you can tape some coins on the bottom
Mm.
to raise it up. As long as it's not as wide as the ruler itself, you shouldn't have any issues.
Or just get artist tape and run a bunch of artist tape. Like that's what we were taught to do
Oh,
when
okay.
I was a kid. It's just I think that was when I was at Kubert School, which I don't know that we've ever talked about that, but
No.
I went there for I went there until like winter break, and then I never went
Okay.
back. But I'm pretty sure that's where I learned that trick. I think it was Sergio Carrillo,
Okay.
who was the figure drawing instructor there at the time, which who was a really awesome guy. I think he showed us that trick.
There's some clean lines on this thing. My goodness.
Yeah, I'm doing for a lot of this stuff on the sword. You can see I'm just using the tech pin because I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they're just such consistent line weight,
Right.
and they're pretty continuous. And I'm having a hard time imagining doing those continuous lines on a curve like that with a dip pin. I'm personally just not very good at that. I don't know how comfortable you are.
You got to just have a very even pressure in order to do it. Um, I'm just going to go ahead and ignore that tool. But you're right. A lot of this looks like it could be a tech pen, or like we talked about before, like the Japanese pens, dip pens. They have a fairly wide variety. I think it's the zebra pen that is closer to what was called like a school nib in the United States. It's intended for like writing essentially, and it's more rigid and has a round edge to it.
They just call that the Z pin typically,
Right.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Z now? Is that okay?
I
That
think
was a,
that's just an abbreviation now. Is just they
for
call it
zebra.
The Z pin.
Okay.
I don't know. When I've looked at the Japanese pin sites, I've seen there's like a Z pin and I think a K pin are the
Well,
two.
maybe the zebra, maybe a particular brand then.
That could be too.
Uh,
Yeah.
but it's a sort of general purpose dip pen that can give you a more consistent line because you don't have to finesse the pressure as much.
Okay.
So like right now, I'm doing this with a Hunt's 100, which I've talked about before, which means that I'm really having to sweat the pressure. Uh, Basically, like with the 100, because it's so loose, it's hard to not get taper at the end of your strokes, especially if you've trained yourself to taper.
Yeah, to maintain that even pressure is a bit difficult. And I'm now regretting a little bit already using the tech pin because I'm thinking, oh, one of the reasons I think this was like a number 8 tech pin is because of that blown out reproduction.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just made lines that now I'm realizing those are probably too thick for trying to recover a sense of like what this looked like.
Right.
So this one's actually a little more similar to a lot of what was going on Strange Death of Alex Raymond, where we had bad reproductions and then we're trying to recover what was going on. And I've realized over the last couple ones of these that we've done, where like this Wolverine one that we did a couple weeks ago, um, because I was used to working from bad reproductions, now that I'm
Right.
working from a good reproduction, I'm actually making the lines thinner.
Right.
Like my inclination is to purposely make things a little bit thinner, and so it's like, oh man, I didn't get it right because I made everything too thin. I think that happened on the Suge one too. If you compare
Mm-hmm.
like yours and mine and his, I undershot the thickness of all the lines.
Right. Yeah, yours definitely had a sort of more refined look than either the original or mine, which were both fairly chunky in comparison.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's refined, just as like lighter. It felt lighter.
It's just interesting how designed all of this is, and I'm actually copying the details of the sword. You can sort of see the method a little bit. Look at this chain link.
Yeah, that's the part that I was like cheating and using the tech pin on because I didn't want to draw that chain link with the 102. I'm a little curious in the chain link. There's stuff that's obviously like little ticky marks,
Right.
and then there's stuff that may or may not be ticky marks. Looking at some of his other work, I'm suspecting it's mostly ticky marks that have filled in.
Yeah.
But like right here, that might just be a black mark. I don't know. I can't tell. Um, so we're just gonna have to make, Sean and I are both gonna have to make kind of design composition
Mm-hmm.
decisions here.
Yeah, I like the little scribblies that are on the edge of the sword. He's done a great job of giving this object personality.
Yeah, and a sense of roundness. That's what I think
Mm-hmm.
is lost a little bit when all of these little ticky marks go away. In some of the cleaner reproductions, he's very careful about always putting that directional ticky mark that shows the thickness of stuff. Like I even wonder if maybe it wasn't in here. So I'm gonna put it in here just to make the inside of the sword more look more like the
Uh,
inside.
yeah, this little ridge or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
yeah. I
100%. I'm with you on that. I'm going to add that in too.
and I don't know if he actually did it or not, but he seems to be a very ticky mark guy, and so I'm gonna flow with that. And I mean that's the fun part too. Is like, well, there's no way this is gonna be an exact replica.
As
You
an interest,
never is, but
it's an interesting sort of a combination of the solid object with a very clearly delineated form or sorry, clearly delineated contour, and then this sort of like texture application on top. This is the other thing I was saying about the animation style, or thinking about this as a, you know, this comic as a piece of proto animation. When you have this
Where
sort of
like you can strip out the texture and be left with the animation.
exactly right,
Okay.
or the texture is sort of substituting for the color of the cell.
Yeah, that's interesting. See, that stuff I wouldn't have thought about at all. Like that picture you had yesterday that you were talking about the parallax. Like as soon as you said it, oh man, I could see it. But up until that point,
Right.
I never would have picked that out of a book.
Yeah, that particular hair move too. That I mean, that's just like animator's wet dream.
Yeah, but I mean, it was really nice to have that. That's like implied motion in a static
Right.
image was really impressive too.
Yeah, no, it's great. um, yeah, there's like two layers of tickiness on this thing here. You've got like the value across the whole thing, I think, and then a darker.
I
Hmm,
was tending to, well, I was looking at it ahead of time, trying to figure out what, especially down the body of the sword here, which is going to be the last thing I do. um, he has a very particular hatching style that is, and I was trying to figure out, is it 3 or 4? It's a 3. So he basically makes a hashtag and then he does one diagonal to that.
you're talking about in the center of the sword. That
Yeah, but
yeah,
even on his figures, a lot of the time, it's something I actually try and get most of my students to stay away from because it winds up being very patchy. He's not doing it on this figure. It was more in the that after the style change in
right.
the book, I started noticing this like hashtag mark, and he'll put it on the figures too. And I don't like it as much on the figures. It looks very piecemeal, patchy to me. On the sword, it works real well, especially up here because he's just creating value and texture in a big area. This image more, he has the tickies, but they're not doing the hashtag thing. But if there was any one thing that like I'm associating like with his style from having looked at what I've looked at so far, it's that hashtag mark.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to pull up the that other page where we can actually see the sword because I just feel it's so buried in here.
Yeah, that's what I was doing earlier, and that's what I was saying. I was looking at that
Right.
because he came up with that language for that sword very early on. Obviously, that was like set in stone from the beginning. And then just looking on the internet because I was dumb and I deleted all the images that we looked at yesterday. Done with these. So I had to search it back up on the internet, and I think throughout all of his style changes, that's one of the things that stayed pretty consistent is that way that and it's really cool. It's like light, dark down the middle, and then
Mm-hmm.
he'll maybe tone both sides, maybe tone one side, depending on what he wants to do with the lighting. But that's like the sword is such a essential part of that book. It seems like.
The it's a variation on a technique in Japanese comics that's so common that it actually has a name in Japanese. I can't remember exactly what it's called in Japanese, but uh, it's a variation of this sort of yeah, what you're calling the hashtag thing. Um, it's typically used to show distress in comics that are basically sans background. You'll have that
Like
pattern.
emotional distress.
Yeah, emotional distress. Somebody finds out something and is upset, and you'll see that
It's like this.
behind them. Right. And but they
And
overlap.
it's a three-way. It's
Right.
always a three-way. And that's an emotional distress.
Yeah, and you can kind of have it snake out. These tutorial books, like we looked at the other day, are very interesting to me from a sort of I don't know, cultural perspective, you get an idea. They're all written by assistants who have to do all these things over and over again, and it's essentially like a training
Yeah.
guide. Um,
That's interesting. So that adds, like, I took it just as uh, distressing in the sense of distress on the sword in a textural
right,
sense. So it's interesting then that if the readers are familiar with that
right.
technique, showing emotional distress, then the sword becomes kind of a symbol of emotional distress.
A visual embodiment of emotional distress. Uh, we should. I'll see if I can find the name of that particular uh, thing and see if I can find the description of it. It shouldn't take me
That's
too long.
interesting.
I have a handful of these books. That company translated 25 of them or something, and most of them are garbage. But 4 or 5 of them I picked up because I was just browsing, way back when, and saw some interesting techniques or saw explanations of something that I had no idea what was happening, before.
That's really interesting. I don't feel like we have marks like that. I mean, we have
Culturally,
things that imply like emotion. We have stuff like, oh, that's a stink mark or that's a
right?
movement mark or whatever, but I can't think of any, yeah, that we would use. Maybe like the spidey sense kind of
Mm-hmm.
distress tingle or the sweat, but I can't think of like a pattern that purely in the abstract, like behind a character, is known.
Right.
So I would never even thought of that. Like when I'm looking at this sword, it's like I'm just seeing representing, yeah, value and texture.
Yeah. Let me see if I can find that. I'm gonna put this down for a second and go. I just want to finish off my sword a little bit. I'm actually surprised so far about how little differentiation there is between the outer contour and the hatching on the inside.
What do you mean exactly on the handle here?
Yeah, I think unless I'm misreading it, that the weights are fairly similar, except for
Oh
the
yeah.
outer portion of the sword. I would,
Well, that it's something that I was struggling with, like actually wanting to fix his art to, like a not. It's not bad. It's just it's a thing that I try and avoid. And again, I would teach my students to avoid it normally. It can't be done very well, and a lot of artists do it very well. But yeah, along the sword here, my tendency is to treat each band that's wrapped separately.
right,
Like he's got this fabric wrapped around it, obviously, and so I'm thinking in terms of contour, which is like come up on this one and then go this way because that's one piece of fabric and that's
right,
another piece and separate. So I was doing that up here. I was separating them out, and then as I'm looking at it, it's like no, he outlined the whole thing first and then went back in.
right,
Same on the hand up here. I'll do it on the hand. I'll do it like the way I would think about it, which to me is an effort to separate the objects out in space a little bit.
mm-hmm.
So I'm purposely, each band is a separate line and I'm not going around and outlining the whole thing. It looks to me, yeah, like he's pretty much going in. And most comic artists do, they'll outline big areas. Um, but that can flatten an image out. So instead of outlining, I tend to use contour lines, which are broken up, separate. That's like the definition, separate broken up lines, each one describing an edge versus one continuous outline that's just separating object from background. We got the kids in the background. So
Mm-hmm.
this is something that I'm learning right now. We were talking about this. This is why we're talking about vasectomies. My partner Tori's son just showed up, and he'll be with us for a month. And I'm learning about kid noises and kid conversation, which really have no. There's no conversation. They're just telling you random
Right.
random things. And he's 10, but it's still video games and stuff. So
Yeah,
it's
the filter is not the strong suit of the young person.
the back and forth part of it, like the I say something, you say something related. Um, so that's interesting. And then we were talking about, and I do think this is interesting because right now I'm in an area of the art where there's not much going on to talk about that we haven't talked about. But you were saying, Sean, that most people you know who are cartoonists kind of intentionally don't have kids.
I don't know if it's intentional. I mean, it seems like it's a musician thing too. I'm just noticing how what a few percentage of people that I know who are in the arts end up having kids, and yeah, it seems like there's a kind of basic incompatibility with, you know, being poor, and
Well, and
and
time, like you just have to
right,
be selfish with your time.
yeah, and if you could devote yourself to making a page a day, you're talking about 10 hours of the day that you're occupied with something that might not be making any money for a long period of time anyway. Um, what do you think about the cloak here? Do you think this was direct to brush, or do you think it was all outlined and then filled in?
I don't know, but there is something when I get there, I'm gonna do it in brush, and there's some. Well, I can show it. I can show it with pen because it might show up better in pen. But it's something I think about a lot. Is and this is another thing that I see a lot of artists do. They would probably be tempted to go draw the outline of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that leads to what I feel aren't as sharp of corners as you could get.
Sure.
So instead of drawing around this corner, my temptation, especially with the brush, is to go like this and then make a stroke like this that crosses over.
Right.
So like if I'm outlining it here, now this one is curved, so I would curve it. But I think a lot of people are tempted to go do this, and then you're constantly trying to like refine that corner to get it sharp, and people go back and they color like this. And um, I have learned over the years, so this was actually something I wanted to point out, is cross your lines like this, especially if you're doing this with the brush. I'll do it with the brush down here. It's going to make for a perfect sharp point. So people do that a lot with edges. It's the same thing that I'm talking about on the hand. People like outline everything instead of work with contour. And when you're working with big areas of black, the tendency is to outline it and fill it in instead of pile shapes on top of each other. And I found over time that the piling shapes over top of each other leads to a much more natural looking image, which that is more how the thing's constructed anyways. So
I I also would hesitate to outline something like this, but for a different kind of reason. Just because for me, you're more likely to make spontaneous improvements if you're using a tool to its fullest and allowing that tool to make characteristic marks of itself. And when I'm looking at something like this, with this cloak and these cool torn forms, I just know if I allow my brush to be a brush, I'm going to get lines that are characteristic of the tool, and I'm going to be able to have an interplay with the tool that's not going to exist if I'm just using it to mop.
yeah, and there is especially when we're doing what we're doing, which quite literally was tracing. I mean,
Right.
we're basically re-inking, but we're not even thinking like an inker so much in the sense of like someone who's doing the original decision making. Like that's
Right.
all been made, and we're just trying to recreate it accurately. Um, so that's a little bit different, but especially when you're the one doing the inking, it's another thing that I'm constantly trying to evangelize is, I, for the longest time, even beginning Strange Death of Alex Raymond, would, I was doing such tight pencils that I was basically drawing the whole image in ink once, scanning
Right.
it in, and printing it back out. And there's, if people want to see that, they can go to A Moment of Cerebus and just look at like, look up Strange Death of Alex Raymond or my name and the little sidebar that Matt has there. And you can see as I was working on the project, I was documenting it all at Dave's request. And in volume 1, that's how I was working. I was tracing it on the computer, printing it out in like a gray. Inking of my pencils were happening basically with a micron and ink, because I was trying to recreate more of the look of the brush strokes, and I wanted to like figure those out ahead of time. I didn't know what they looked like yet, and so I was doing these super tight, basically like finished inks that they got looser and looser as I went. But then when I was going back over it, I was just tracing.
Right.
I mean, trying to add some spontaneity back into it, but it's pretty much just tracing, and it does take all of the spontaneity of your reaction, not just to the tool, but to the stimulus of the image.
The developing image. Uh, uh, Reaction is a good word. I have a sort of private language for this. I've called it construction versus reactive or reaction. If you think about the difference between, if you build a house, you have to plan out every single detail because obviously you don't want it to fall over. And sometimes you plan out every single move so that you feel safe or you're comforted by it. But then a reactive image, you have the opportunity to react in real time to it. So if you were the person who's creating this thing here and you put in a big hunk of black, all of a sudden, you might think to yourself, well, geez, that silhouette that I was going to put in on the sword, I don't need it anymore. Now that I've got this big hunk of black, over that area, I can back up the sword a little bit and have it be, a more middle tone. All those things are things that, like, if you were actually making the image yourself, might be part of your thought process. It's a reactive portion of it. But yeah, if you overplan, if there is such thing, if like you're talking about, Carson, and you're planning for something and then kind of taking it a little too far, you might be depriving yourself of the reactive experience.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at it. Well, I mean, in the planning phase, there was some of that stuff, but it took away the freshness of the actual, like, yeah, the actual tools, reacting with the actual tools. I was just trying to recreate. I mean, I had got to the point there where I wasn't just tracing. I was, still reacting and making something new, but not as much as, say, volume 2, where I just did. So I took care of the construction stuff. That's what the tracing is for. The tracing is like just a time saver to take care of the structural stuff, the proportions. And when you're working on like Miura here is, obviously this is all coming out of his imagination for the most part. I mean, maybe he's referencing something, but this is pretty imaginative drawing
Yeah,
overall.
he might have some bodybuilder, magazines or something around the studio, but it's not that he's taking this pose from a particular place.
Yeah, so he's doing the construction, figuring out all the anatomy and stuff. I mean, I'm always curious to see how tight an artist's pencils are or not, but I would imagine when you're doing your own inks that a lot of it, the hatching and all that stuff's pretty reactive,
Right.
on top, and that's like how it should be. I think a lot of people like myself that grew up wanting to get into the American comic industry and learned about, oh man, I'm totally lost in this area here. I cannot see what's going on.
The hatching on the arm here.
Yeah, and there's like a strap going on in there that I almost
Is
missed.
there?
There's something going on in there. I can't tell what it is. Anyways, you get used to the idea, and even though I never really liked it, but you get used to the idea of the separation of the tasks,
Right.
penciler, inker, colorist, and so you get a lot of cats who learn how to over pencil.
Right.
They over describe because they know it's going to an inker, and
Yeah.
they don't trust what the heck that person's going to do with their art. And so I developed that, even when I was inking for myself, I kind of had that super tight penciling, and then it was just tracing, and it took forever to learn, like, hey dude, you're inking your own stuff, like, just do it in ink.
Right.
Save some time. The other thing, and this is another thing, when I deal with cross hatching as a lesson in my classes, there will be some students who will cross hatch the whole thing, and this is like not comic book cross hatching, but trying to get like a really realistic image with the full range of values. They'll cross hatch the whole thing in pencil, and then they'll quit looking at the subject matter, and then they'll just trace what they got in pencil in ink. But the problem is ink's darker. So if you create the same values in or the same density of hatching in pen as you do in pencil, it's a way darker value, and so you're not looking at that kind of information either, if you're drawing from like a source. So part of when I'm saying reactive, I don't just mean reactive to the tools, but I'm talking about someone who, you know, uses reference and stuff and draws from photographs or draws from objects in front of me. You're no longer reacting to the source stimulus either. So
Right.
I think you're talking about it more in reacting to like the imaginative part of it, reacting to the compositional and artistic decisions that you're making.
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, you know, just it's two different mindsets, I guess, is my point. I had a rather crude way to communicate this to a design teacher that I had before, where he asked us to do an overly complex design project that involved a clock or something. I don't recall exactly what it is, but I bought a clock from Home Depot and set it on fire, and then poured
Art school.
and then poured paint all over it, and, you know, took all the elements that he asked me to do it and put like some garbage version of that over the entire thing, and then wrote "fuck Frank Lloyd Wright" on the outside of it.
He must have liked Frank Lloyd Wright.
I heard him mentioned in the class so many times. Anyway, yeah, one of the many examples of a way that you can succeed in art school without actually learning anything.
Yeah, that is a very art school project. My favorite art school stuff is the art school stuff that's about art school. Like when I was in grad school, there were so many people who were doing really, you know, interesting, compelling things, but it was pretty much critiques of critique, you know,
Right.
like being in a critique. And I always thought, like, I mean, you're smart, so I'm sure you will adapt to when you get out into the real world, but this art doesn't make sense outside of the
Right.
context that we're currently in. Yeah, art school. I miss those days.
Well, I was
Okay.
depriving myself of the time of the experience of learning, you know, the thing he was trying to teach me by doing something
Yeah, but
clever instead.
that's kid stuff. You know, it's just, especially if you have someone who you feel is kind of obnoxious, like
Right.
I'm sick of hearing a Frank Lloyd Wright. So this area here causes me a lot of distress, and we've ran into a number of these in these recreations that we've done where I can't tell if they put a third weave of hatching or not, and my instinct is to put the third weave of hatching, and then we scan them in, and I always think it looks like garbage, but it looks like it gets lighter in the middle here and then darker again, and I don't know if that's just a line weight variation that I'm missing out on, or a third.
Yeah, it would be obvious if you saw it in when he was doing it at the, you know, at the moment. There's some fun stuff with the in that area that you're in, Carson, with the directionality of the hatching. You saw that I put in some black, some solid black for the hatching to go into on the sort of curves of the cloak there that's bunched up around his neck.
Yeah.
And then he swaps the directionality a few times in the hatching that's coming up from it.
You got a weird hum coming through your mic now.
Better now?
No. I did want to talk about how you're approaching the cloak too. Yeah, you're talking about this part of the cloak. Yeah, there's some, and that's really hard to see exactly. Once you start inking over a blue line, especially, is hard.
Actually, meant inside here, the folds that are bunched up around his neck.
Yeah, and it looks like that's some area that I was wondering if you think is it looks like all pen, but it gets so thick, my temptation is to jump to the brush.
Right. I built up some brush lines before I started.
Yeah, that's maybe what I'll need to do. You've still got like a hum and a hiss. It's odd. I don't know if your mic's leaning against your camera or something.
Sorry, I don't know what else to...
Hmm.
I plugged in the laptop. I don't know if that's caused it.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Oh, well, sorry, everybody. This is another one where I think because it's like the Barry Windsor Smith one we did last week. I think because we're able to trace over it in its finished state, we are ignoring maybe his order of doing things, the way he structured it. Like, I do feel like it's probably, we should have gone in and done all of the contour outline work first.
Right.
Like you were talking about the part that you would strip out the texture and okay, that's like what an animator would do.
Right.
I kind of feel like maybe I should be doing that first. So I'm going to try that for the rest of it. Because that's, especially if you're doing loose pencils, I would imagine that's going to be the go-to method here. Is
it helps you firm up the image before you do any of the accumulation of detail. You accumulate any detail.
Yeah, and even in this area you're talking about here, I can see that there was like a line like this.
Yeah, I put that one in. No, he definitely drew the cloak with a contour that's then sort of buried by the black edge.
Yeah, and I can't tell how far that extends. This one definitely has a line like this around it. So that does reinforce for me this idea that it was probably just a contour drawing first. We got to be more careful about that, I think, in the future, because we on this one it's not so bad because it's a little bit more controlled of an image, but it really got us in trouble with Barry Smith.
No, it's true.
I am going to outline the head first, I guess, just because I'm here. And then the eye looks like it has some dot tone in it. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't.
Maybe that's just poor reproduction. It looks like there's a little bit of dots. I don't think that would actually be part of the art, but I could be wrong.
I would guess, this is, like we talked about before, this image is down a few generations. I wondered if maybe it was actually reproduced from newsprint.
Like they scanned an old newsprint.
Yeah.
Printing of it. Yeah, that makes sense.
There were a few pages in that opening one that were clearly several generations down.
One of the cool things I like about how he's doing this here is I do think this like cloak is pretty much all just pen work. Even in the blacks, I think they're long pen strokes.
Oh, okay.
I got too much ink on this one spot. Ugh. Okay, well, that's pretty much what I would imagine the contours of the thing are. Another thing I couldn't tell in the reproduction, I'm going to go with, I don't think these here on his shoulder pad are black marks. I think they're all ticky marks.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm tempted to say maybe the top. I don't know. I'm gonna do it. What I think is maybe going on there. I think maybe the top is like a black stroke.
Oh, okay.
And then the rest are ticky marks. I don't know why. But it could be ticky marks up here. There's some stuff on the cloak too where it blacks out a little bit. And then I think what's happening, Sean, is if I talk, we're getting like a feedback.
Okay.
And it just sounds like on your audio.
Well, let me switch to headphones.
we'll try it and see.
Actually, how about that?
No, now I can hear myself actually, literally.
Oh, okay. Huh.
I could hear myself go, I don't know. Every time I talk, it's followed up by a...
Okay, give me a second.
Anyways, I was noticing here, it looks like mostly black on the reproduction, but it's actually cool. He came out of here with marks like this that show the direction of the inside of the cloak moving up and around his neck there. So that's really nice. That's something that's unfortunate that it gets lost. Yeah, that's an unfortunate loss in the art because it adds a lot to it. So then I think these are just ticking marks here. Like hatching marks. Which when you look at the rest of his art is a pretty common texture that he puts on everything.
Oh, I think I've got a ground hum.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
How's that? Okay.
Much better. Yeah, that's what it was. And I don't know why I wanted to do this, but I just thought it looked cool to have like the black mark there. I don't know if that's what he was doing or not.
No, I think you're probably right about all the contour stuff.
Right here, there's definitely contour lines. I'm probably going to switch to a brush for this stuff because I'm really bad about dragging my hand through the ink.
Okay.
So if I do big, he's got such big, thick pen strokes, obviously. I just make a mess of it. So I'm going to switch to brush here in a second. But I don't think that's how it was done.
I quite like the hatching that feathers into the cloak.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's obviously done with a pen.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'm going to do most of it with the brush just because I'll make a mess of it. He also does this. I'm going to get all the pen work done first. I really like how it's kind of like the Jim Lee thing where it's a very careful weave of how the two different directions of cross hatching, like on his top here, his armor on the side. It's just like such a lined up, perfect little set of marks that he makes. Like they always start right at where the other one left off. And that gets that hashtag look that I'm going to do up in the sword too. Are you able to tell righty or lefty?
No. He doesn't have a lot of there's some tapering in the hatching lines, but there's not a lot of tapering in the contour lines because probably the Z pen thing I was talking about. Okay. But yeah, I can't tell righty or lefty. I'm rotating to do the cloak, but that's feasible that he would be rotating to do the cloak too.
It's something I was telling Tori about this. She's like, "Oh, you should do a video where you just get a bunch of different artists, like not even known professionals, but just have people that I know make images and then send them to do a challenge video." Yeah.
Righty or lefty? Well,
I mean, it'd be cool.
If they know what the purpose of the challenge video is, they might, flip it upside down and fuck with us.
Yeah, maybe. No, but not like, yeah, we definitely wouldn't let them know what was going on. Just, it would have to be people who are like competent enough to have good tapers.
Right.
I would do it with pros, but I don't know that I could find out who was what hand.
Dr. Seuss is somebody it's really clear because he, I mean, to my eye anyway, has the barest of indications in pencil and is essentially drawing and hatching and thinking all with the image all at the same time simultaneously.
And so you can just see so clearly.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. It would be a fun challenge, though.
Well, I would challenge you to copy a Dr. Seuss drawing perfectly without rotating it after we've mirror flipped it.
Oh, so you think he's right-handed? So
Yeah.
if we mirror flipped it, okay.
Have you copy it mirror flipped and have me copy it straight up and not allow each of us to rotate it.
That would be fun. That would be a good video. I was gonna say I thought you were implying he was left-handed. I did do a Dr. Seuss, and I did it all in acrylic paint. I recreated one of his as a painting. And yeah, getting his lines as acrylic was that was also a challenge. Because they are ink lines, it's not something you want to reproduce in acrylic. Okay, I'm gonna do one. I think I can do this all in pen. They do start to change up here, huh?
Mm-hmm.
They go like this. Yeah, that's fun. To me, this is the most fun stuff. I don't know why. I just love making tapered hatch marks.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most pleasure. Maybe it's just the whoosh, whoosh of the pen.
I like the whipping motion of it.
Tori thinks that I'm probably would have been registered on the autism spectrum as a kid, and that I'm doing what they call stemming. You're just finding some stimulation that like soothes you and pleases you. It's very likely. So there's kind of two layers of hatching going on down here in the cloak as well, I think. On this last one here. Like a thinner one and then a thicker one. So I'm always going to do the thinner layer first. And then I'm going to move up to the sword.
Yeah, that's what I'm just started now.
That's the fun part. That's the hashtag part. You're too fast. I'm always catching up. It worked better when you were having to draw it. I really like on the sword also these little areas that create dents in the sword.
Mm-hmm. You think that that probably wouldn't have been done with whiteout because it has tone on top of it afterwards.
No, they're just little ticky marks.
Oh.
I think, right? It's just ticky marks.
Avoidance.
Like just avoiding anywhere where it's avoided. Where do you see it that's avoided?
There's these I suppose it's just single layer.
Oh, I'm talking about this stuff outside the hatching area.
The dents or whatever. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, the
dents. I like that. So here's where this raised ruler is going to come in real handy. From what I can tell, he did a much thinner line here, so I'm assuming that was with the pin, and it looks kind of broken up, which sometimes, yeah, like the pin that I just did breaks up a little bit. Also, from a practical, just don't drive yourself crazy standpoint, I'm going to tape that edge off so I can just go wild.
Okay.
Because I find it it can really hurt my hand a lot these days to have to be controlled enough to start and stop at a very exact edge like that for a long period of time, like on a straight line like that.
I find it's a lot easier if I start from the edge.
Yeah, for sure. But I've been taping off straight lines like that if I'm going to hatch up to them a lot. I think Gerhard did that a lot too, right? He would use
Yeah.
that border tape that him and Dave had with the
Mm-hmm.
squiggly lines.
Yeah, they had a wide.
Uh-oh, we lost Sean. Well, I'll keep going. I had taped off, I think I taped off the Wolverine. I taped off something that we had done, and the artist tape, which is not supposed to stick, stuck and tore the paper. So what I'm doing right now, it's crazy, but I'm putting it on my arm, and I'm picking up some of the oils from my arm, and that's going to lessen the adhesive properties of the tape. So hopefully when I pull this back off, it won't tear the image. It's really frustrating when, especially, you're working on something that's so precise and you're aiming for precision and you're trying to get this beautiful finished state of the artwork, like as an object, which is something I'm thinking about. I don't think people that think about art for reproduction think about that as much necessarily. And then you tear the paper. It's so frustrating. So this is a trick I've learned. Maybe kind of gross because I'm leaving some DNA on the paper. Probably not the best in terms of getting oil on the paper, but for me it works. At least for now. Any paper that I've had hanging around hasn't gotten like oil stains on it yet or anything like that. Okay. I am going to, before I do this, well, no, we'll make that up on the fly. We'll leave the cape alone. So this is what I found is the most distinctive mark of Miura's work, and all the stuff I've seen. And he puts it on figures and everyone else, but there's this hashtag, and then he'll stay within the confines of the patch that he created and do a three-way hashtag like that. So two at, two that are like at 45s, but I guess they'd be at 90s to each other, and then one that's at a 45 to those. I'm not going to try and mimic his exactly because that would take forever and be a nightmare. And then personally, me, if I was doing that, I would do all the one layer stuff first. Hey, you're back.
Hey, and so was the hum.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'm gonna try to switch this here.
So one of the things that I really like about this, I tend to use this approach when I'm hatching as well a lot of the times, especially in background areas, because it's really quick. You don't have to cover a lot of ground to get this look to work. So you don't have to like strain your hand to be covering long areas of hatching. It's really quick too once you have the basic mark down. Again, I'm probably going too light. I think I'll try and press a little harder. So I'm talking about this hashtag pattern that's in the sword.
Right.
And you said that this is the thing that shows up in.
Yeah, this is a visual cliche. I mean, a cliche is not quite the right word. This is like a trope. Um, I wish I could remember what it's called, but there's a certain like net method that is the accepted way to do it, and is basically like a visual sign of distress or whatever, and you do it in a sort of weave.
And do you have any like? Do you remember hearing anything about where that came from?
I mean, some comic artist in the 50s or 60s or 70s started doing it. I mean, I think it started as a shoujo like girls for comic or comics for girls kind of thing. But you know, it's a even though it's a very large industry, it's incestuous in the sense that everybody sort of sees everybody else's work, and people work for each other, and a person who might have done that as a background artist for one comic artist might have started working for somebody else and brought it to them.
I just wonder if there's like the person that originally did that, if there was some deeper cultural thing that they were relying on there when they came up with that solution. Like it, because I was just trying to describe a little bit that I tend to use this for, I find it very useful for backgrounds. If I want to imply, I didn't get to that part yet, but if I want to imply a lack of direction in a background, this kind of short all over mark is really good versus something that's very, like Gerhard would do on buildings all the time. He would follow what would be the horizontal, the vertical, and then the 45s, because that implies like a flat surface. This more all over approach to me implies air because there's no directionality to it. And I'm actually going to, I don't know if this is what he did, but this is the way it's most comfortable to me. I'm going to start spinning this.
Right, me too.
And at the bottom, I started trying to do mostly like slight tilts on what would be the horizontal, but this is more comfortable for me. I don't know if this is what he was doing or not, but I find that this is, yeah, it's a great representation of air, or something that's lacking direction. So it's very curious to me to find out that it's been used for an emotional state. And I wonder if
extensively, yeah.
I wonder if there's a Japanese character that it looks like.
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, some religious symbol that it has a resemblance.
Let me actually go get the book, because I think I'm relatively the same place as you are, maybe a little further, so I think I can afford to
draw so damn fast.
Well, I mean, yeah. Let me go get it. See if I can find it.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that.
But it's basically like a basket weave of a couple strokes and a patchy sort of basket weavy aspect.
Yeah, and I've seen it behind heads, and I always think it looks so weird because, and they tend to do it real thick, like really obvious. It's really weird to me when those lines are blown up. So I'm actually, Sean might be solving something for me that's always bothered me about some of the manga, is they'll use those letrotone patterns, the dot patterns, the line patterns and stuff like that. It'll be so big and thick sometimes that to me it looks so superficial and graphic designy. It doesn't look like it's creating tone anymore. It doesn't look like it's creating value. So knowing that there could be different ones that are rendering emotional states is actually a huge revelation to me. Like next time I read manga, like I feel like I'll get it better. In this case, I like, I'm saying when I use this, I tend to be implying a lack of direction. So on a sword, that you might think going in, like following the direction of the sword might make sense. But to me, this also does add a very nice, like beat up, dented texture to it. So he is kind of implying directional changes here.
There we go. When a rough, grainy look is desired, use this sort of, okay, blah, blah, blah. This is actual cross-hatching using rounded instead of straight strokes. Our next topic will be a little difficult, nawa-ami, or chord hatching.
Okay.
Once you give it a try, you'll find it's easier than you thought. This
create a rectangular block using oblique lines, a similar block is then drawn at a different angle, slightly overlapping the first. The key here is that the lines should be spaced equidistantly and have the same thickness. It should be as if the two blocks are contiguous. The key here is that the juncture of the blocks, the juncture should not be open. I find this perfectly suitable for building shadows as well. When it's used as a backdrop for a character, it tends to suggest unease. It can be also used as a shading for a character. The process is repeated over and over again. One way of ensuring a satisfying outcome is to first roughly sketch the chords in pencil. So this is the typical emotional use of it. You can,
Oh, okay. So that one's less hashtaggy and a little bit more. They're not at, like, this is like at 90-degree angles. The way he's using it is at 90-degree angles and then 145 to those 90 degrees. They're talking about more like what he's doing on the Cape, where it's at like 4 or 5 degrees, like that Neil Adams kind of, where it's at 4 or 5 degree angles to each other. It
well,
looks like
the key being that the patches are overlapping each other. Yeah, so maybe it's distinct from that, but it seems fairly similar to me. Although I suppose you're right, the angle changes here seem more extreme.
Well, and you're actually not overlapping, really. Like, from what I saw, you're not overlapping the patches. You're
on the sword?
Yeah, like if you look at what I've got, I'm intentionally, that looks like there's more overlap than it is, but you'll see right now I've got like one layer. You're doing that too, one layer, and you're not overlapped. Well, you are overlapping them. So I've left all mine not overlapped.
Okay.
What's going to create the look of overlap is now on each one of these, I'm going to come back in and be very careful to do stay exactly within the boundary of the patch that I've created and work at a perfect 90-degree angle to what I've already done.
Okay.
And then I'll do the same thing, and I'll come back in and I'll work at a 45-degree angle to those sets of 90-degree angles. So
okay.
This is why I call it a hashtag, because right now I am just making hashtags, and really the hashtags do not cross into each other very much at all. Like, I think if you like really zoom in on one of the clean pieces of his work, you'll see it. The thing is once you get the 3 directions going, it creates a pretty even tone, and maybe you're doing it quick, so there's little bits of overlap, and it creates a surprisingly integrated feeling surface.
That's interesting. I just assumed that the overlap was intentional and was a little bit more than that, in accordance with that visual trope.
No, he's very, and this is one of the reasons I tell my students to stay away from this stuff, is because it can look very much like a patchwork quilt or something like that. It destroys the sense of integration across the surface. When they're doing it, they tend to get into this when they're doing cross hatching,
right,
and they'll be trying to create a surface with a gradient on it, and it breaks it up. On his sword, though, it does make it look more dented and pockmarked to have it broken up. But from what I could tell, there isn't much integration between each little hashtag patch. And it goes, for me at least, I can do it very quick. I can stay within the boundaries of each little patch I've created and go pretty quickly, but I do this a lot too. So
I'm going to be very interested to see these up close.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what your effect is. Because from what I can tell, yeah, you're spinning it and getting like more rounded. His is almost straight lines, but they're a little bit, they just have the natural curve of the hand to them. The psychic thing that you're talking about makes way more sense to me now that I've seen.
Well, especially if you build those chords up, and you can really make a sense of unease by sort of wrapping them around the background, which I think
that seems more standard to me. it's like that Van Gogh,
Right.
Starry Night kind of warp, or the Scream, and
But
it's a dizzy look.
right, exactly. And you know, you can use it to it's essentially like a basket weave, you know, with overlap applied as a psychological effect across a, you know.
Yeah, what I'm doing is kind of different than that. So that's why I was so surprised. I was like, this is a really weird thing to be showing. I've definitely seen what I'm doing here, like blown up really thick. And I've always wondered, why in the world are you blowing that up so thick behind a character's head? And so I thought I had an answer to that, but now maybe I don't. We'll see though. We'll see when we. This is the area when we post these on YouTube. I'll do a pulled back one, and then I'll do this area really tight with and without the tone over it.
Right.
As a comparison, because there's tone all over this too.
Right. Across the whole thing, like a 10% that's been turned into like a 40% through multiple generations.
Yeah, unfortunately. But when you see the images that have reproduced better, you get a sense of what tone he was actually using on the sword.
It's quite satisfying looking, even if I'm doing it in a different method. It's got a nice.
It feels very like the sword has intention of its own on yours.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's got a. Yeah, I mean, the pattern has a vibrational quality to it, and
royals,
and the fact that it's designed so cleanly means that having an area of the image that's essentially just like aggravated at you is fine because it's contained.
Contained aggravation. Thematically, it makes a bunch of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see these up close now. And you'll see, like, I think a lot of people look at that artwork. I mean, there's definitely pages in there that we looked at, like that scene where they're in the back end of the book where it changes styles and they're invading that castle where it's like there's 5,000 little guys drawn in there and stuff. But I think some people look at like the sword and they see all this cross hatching and they're like, oh my God, this guy must spend forever artwork. But you'll see how fast we're blowing through this once your hand is accustomed to this motion.
Right. This is just time. I mean, you know, it's a fill in. You design a good visual solution that carries you through and makes a lot of decisions for you.
Yeah, and this is, like I said, this is the one that, like, no matter what era of Berserk I'm finding art from online, and no matter what, when I you know, I haven't read the rest of the volumes yet, but when I flip through them, like, this is a design decision he made apparently when he was 18, because he's a talented, insane, like, oh my God, I didn't know he was doing it that young.
Well, I think Berserk was when he was 19. I think that 18 is when he was a assistant on Fist of the North Star.
I mean, well, still.
I'd be very curious as to what he was doing as an assistant.
Well, I got volume 1 coming, so we can. I mean, I don't know at what point he was an assistant on it either, but
1988. So we'll have to see.
I don't. Yeah, we'll find out, but it'll be interesting to see if we can maybe find some of him in there. Oh,
yeah,
that looks like a Miura.
Depending on the artist, there's definitely artists who have abdicated some responsibility, let's say, to other people.
The North Star? Oh, okay.
No, in general, you know, especially weekly production. I mean, it's just brutal. I mean, I don't even know if you can quite conceive of what 24 pages a week or 50 pages a week would look like.
Oh, it's insane. I've been watching some videos lately. There's I'm gonna mangle the guy's name. Naoki Urasawa, is he 20th
Mhm.
century?
Yeah.
He does a show called Manbin, and it's basically him getting other super famous Junji Ito, other people at his level.
Right.
The guy that did Sanctuary and Crying Freeman.
Oh, really? Riko Ikegami or?
Yeah, there's
Oh,
not a lot of it has like English language closed captions on it yet, but there's some of them on YouTube, and they sit around and talk about manga, and then what they do is the guests, they film them like what we're doing now, and then he sits with the guest and they watch themselves draw and talk about what they're doing.
wow.
It's really, really fascinating stuff. I forgot why I was going down that route. Oh no, there was one with Ennio Asano, who's like my favorite dude right now. The Goodnight Pun Pun and Dead Demons Destruction. And man, that guy does so much of it himself. For how detailed, he's someone we're definitely going to look at. For how detailed his stuff is, he does so much himself still. I was very surprised. It's kind of, I mean, I guess it goes back to what we're talking about with cartoonists not having kids. Like,
Right. No, it's not a
like,
social. You're not going to have a social life if you're putting together a weekly serial.
yeah, and I mean, even if you do have a partner, it's like, Tori's kid's here now, and I'm like, just the little bit that I have going on, it's already like, oh my God, there's
Right.
so much extra time that I need to be able to devote now to this other little person
Right.
that I can't imagine having time. I mean, I get it. I also have a job that the cartoonists, they can say, okay, well, daddy's 8 hours over here, and
Right.
but yeah, man, I can't imagine. So I get it, but it becomes, so that's something else we were talking about. This, like, already I'm having this urge to escape because that's the cartoonist is like, we kind of like being on our little holed up, and when I don't get that, I get very crazy. But also, this just seems to be so many miserable cartoonists that it's like, you gotta, I don't know, it doesn't seem healthy in the long run. It seems very lonely. So I think, yeah, balancing, like, it's probably better. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to learn how to balance it for my long term.
Right.
Like, short term, it's difficult, but when I'm 80, I don't want to still be the lonely guy hunched over a board at the end, at the end of the day. I mean, maybe I get to be
Right.
there for some of the day, but okay, now I'm going back in and putting in
The third layer.
the third layer. And I think when you do that, you start to see that the patches start to go away, because no matter how you've turned it
Right.
and roiled it, there's so many different directions that they all start to tend to line up a little bit.
Yeah. It really. I feel like I've got an ominous cloud now as I'm adding in this third wave here. I'm going to be very curious to see if the effect is actually different between what you've done and what I've done.
Yeah, once you get so much on there, it may not
Mhm.
even make much of a difference. But also going back to like this perception that people have about how much work was put in, this was a solution that he came up with when he was 19, and he stuck with it for the entire, well, not the run of the series, but until he passed. And it gives the impression of, man, I'm not saying the dude didn't put in
Yeah.
his whole life into it, but it gives the impression of like, how can one person do all of that mark making? It seems like an impossible amount of mark making, but as you can see, it actually
Right.
goes pretty quick, especially once you train your hand. It's not like this very slow, tedious process that I
Yeah.
think the person who doesn't do art or hasn't done much assumes that it is.
No, this is a very effective, this is a very cost-effective, time-effective way of suggesting detail and texture, and yeah, I'm very satisfied with this right now, despite having done it in a completely different way as you.
Yeah, but I mean that's cool because then we'll have a good comparison. Let me pull yours over to the left a little bit. I want to. Yeah, it's pretty much the same look. Actually,
Yep.
maybe you are doing it right. I'll have to see it up close. Maybe there were more bands in there than I thought because there's a roundness to it that looks right in yours that I'm not seeing in mine.
Feels pretty good. I don't know. I think I might be done here.
I'm gonna have to do the. You beat me on all the blacks.
Yeah, I like to get it in early. That's my preferred methodology when I'm actually working on an image of my own.
Which we've seen every time now.
Right. We've talked about this, but my justification for it, there's a couple different reasons, but my justification for it is basically like, if I put in the blacks first, I know I have something to respond to.
Yeah. And I think I've said it before. If I'm doing my own work, it all kind of just happens at the same time, like the blacks and any of the smaller details. It's just because I'm working on stuff from images. You can kind of like I don't have to make as many contrast decisions because I can see them in the source material. Like if the source material is good, then I can just kind of roll with it. And then when I'm copying images, it's actually very difficult. Once the black is in there, it overrides my ability to see what's going on in the blue a little bit. So maybe I've stayed away from that. I do tend to also do a final evaluation of the image at the end, and that is a lot of blacks will go in like it's not like that thing's not popping out, or a lot of the times it's I put in too much detail and I'll just go, okay, that whole area needs I spent all this time, and I see that a lot in Alex Raymond's work actually, where he did a bunch of cross hatching. You could see it, and then he just like he just colored over the whole, he did all this work and then he just decided to put the whole thing into shadow.
Well, that's the thing I'm trying to avoid by doing the black in there. But I do remember that was one of the comments that Dave had on your pages for the volume 1 when we were working on You Don't Know Jack. He just basically suggested that you go back in and make giant sweeping anchor points on some of the pages.
Yeah, but he wasn't talking about spotting black so much as he was talking about thickening up certain edges, basically.
It seemed like there were some times when he wanted it as like a compositional anchoring technique.
Yeah, but it was also just a stylistic, I think it was a stylistic, like, well, they had these bigger lines and you have these very tiny lines. Yeah, when I went and did it, like sometimes it worked, sometimes I felt like it ruined the image. Luckily we had scans of both stages, because there was definitely times where I went and did it and I was like, oh God, I just ruined this thing that I liked.
It seemed like we used about half of the ones that you had revised, and then about half of them that were like, or you were.
Yeah, I was a little bit, this probably isn't because this artist doesn't do it at all, but those guys will they'll put a big thick outline in what I think of as a very unlikely place. It's not indicating something. I think we talked about that a little bit in like the hair and stuff. So I was just a little bit mystified at how to make those decisions, and sometimes I made the right decision and sometimes I made the wrong decision. Okay, I'm gonna have on here. All right, so now when I pull this tape off, you get that like woo Ooh, that's perfect without me having to get any damage on my wrist by being really tense about stopping and starting. Okay, now we'll get the brush and try and go real quick. You're just going back over to Wolverine over there. Oh no, what do you got? Oh, you got the rest of the page. Okay. Sean's gonna ink the whole page.
Trying out some of the face shading here. This is a pretty standard for young men's comic, but it's nice, very nice.
You'll see the hashtag thing I talked about on his figures sometimes too. I don't know if it's on these pages, but I think it was something he developed a little bit later, maybe. Like when it got to that point in the comic where there was like no black anywhere, then
right.
you get a lot of this hashtag pattern all over the place. This is something here. So pointing out when I'm working on the edge of this robe, now you'll see I'm doing what I was doing in pen, but I'm doing it with the brush to try and make things look sharper. This was something I realized I wanted to point out in a video, because I think a lot of artists skip this, and the tendency will be to just go like all the way around, and I think they're losing a lot of the times. I remember when I figured this out, I think I was inking over a Mark Buckingham. I was just trying to make some ink samples, and I was inking over Mark Buckingham on Fables, I think, and I saw how the shapes piled up and how that made cleaner edges. Like, so like to me, this goes like this, and then this little thing comes off of the edge. I don't know, a nerdy thing. Is that something you think about, Sean?
You know, most of the time when I'm using the brush, I'm just trying to keep it fairly spontaneous. But yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of I think that's a very nice technique, the pulling through the line from the point like that. You know, this is a fairly designy image.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing you can do too is if you have lost some of the desired finesse by doing it with a big brush, do what I'm doing right now, which is kind of pointing it. Just a slight bit of like pen finessing to sort of give it a little bit more of a illusion of detail on the edges.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people do that when they don't need to, and that's
Right.
what I talk about. I need to come up with a term for, like, I talk about drawing. That's drawing, like
Right.
going back and oh, I got to go back and clean up the little edge. There's got to be a better. What would you say? So like I'm talking about the opposite of that on how
Right.
I'm treating it. What we need a word for that. I've never.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're making the mark that you're it's I mean, you could argue that it's a responsive thing again, in that you're allowing the tool to be part of your process.
I mean, it is drawing, and to me, it's like a more elegant way to approach drawing.
Oh, it's more finicky. Yeah, if you do the opposite, it's super finicky. I mean, it's just you're depriving yourself of the pleasure of the tool if you just use a Sharpie to fill in and make a faux brush line, you know?
Maybe that's what I need to call it. It's finicky, but I tend to say drawing when I mean like this overly, but it's not just that. There's, I don't know what, because there will be other artists we look at where I'll be able to point it out. I'm just going to call it painting.
Yeah.
It's a more painterly approach. So it sounds weird when you are drawing, because I am drawing, but there's drawing, which is like, this is a lot of drawing. The hatching is actually less drawing to me. Because
don't at me, Mike Magnolia.
What?
I said, don't at me, Mike Magnolia.
Yeah, well, yeah, he draws a lot, huh? Because he outlines everything and then fills it in with the Sharpie. I
I
think.
don't know. It looks like it sometimes. I'm not sure.
We'll have to get one of his artist editions. I think they have an artist. I'll have to get a hold of it, see if I can find one. I mean, there's people that pull it off. You can develop a style out of it
Sure.
where his stuff actually, to me, looks really elegant. But
Yeah,
I
no,
need,
it's got a great
uh,
design sense.
yeah, and his drawings don't feel tight at all. They're
Right.
very fresh feeling. There's a lot of people that have. I mean, a lot of people that pull off what I'm talking about very well. But I need a term for it when it goes wrong. I guess finicky, but to me, it's you're drawing too much. Like, let the tools do the work instead of let your hand having to do everything for you.
Well, I think that a lot of beginners are intimidated by the tools, and they're intimidated about the idea that you're going to spend 15 hours drawing something in pencil and then ruin it because you've never used a nib before. I would tell those people that you should doodle with the nib and get experience with the tool as a tool.
Yeah, and I mean, fair enough. Like, I've used the nibs and brushes for years and years and years before I could just like pick it up and effortlessly kind of express what's on my mind with it, get
But
the thin lines I wanted. So I get it. They
you
pick up the
make yourself
microns.
a test sheet with any new tool that you get. Not you, I'm addressing this to the not you in particular, Carson.
No,
Uh,
yeah, but I do. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I like to do for a new tool. And come up with like those exercises that I came up with,
mhm.
like, figure out what kind of marks you want to make and then test them in multiple directions. And but yeah, it takes a long time. I was never very good at, I don't know about you, but I was never very good at in music terminology, like practicing your chops,
Right.
which is what those stroke sheets are. They're like sitting around and doing a paradiddle with some drumsticks.
Right.
I always wanted to, and I learned better when I applied the thing in a live situation. So, like in a drawing, practicing that technique in a drawing, or like, okay, I'm learning a paradiddle on the drums, and now I'm going to try and like make a song out of that. So, I get the reluctance to practice your chops, but I really wish I wish I was better at chops
Uh,
practice.
I think that doing something like going and doing an on-site drawing directly in ink, or doing life drawing from a model directly in ink, all those things can kind of encourage you to think of it more as an actual implement rather than as some type of secondary stage that happens after your thinking has happened.
Yeah, that's really smart too, because they do think about it as, and I think this may be partially an American comic industry thing, but it is like penciling and then inking.
Right.
And so you don't think about the inking as the drawing tool, and it is just a tracing tool. And then you stiffen up because you're biting your tongue and sticking your tongue out and biting your lip, trying to just trace exactly what you love so much about your pencil, and
Right.
it winds up killing the whole thing. But it took me years to learn that, especially because I grew up in the era where the comic industry was so much about pencilers and inkers. And like, you didn't dare show an editor at like a convention your inked work if you were trying to get a penciling job.
So funny. Well, it's easier for them to control people if everybody's in their own box.
Yeah,
We've talked about this before, like somebody, who's like a editor wants to push the sandwich button. They want to have a Kirby sandwich. They hit the Kirby button. They want to know predictably what it is that they're going to get, and if they can pay for those things separately, different people negotiating in different ways, then they can, I think it's an economics thing more than anything else. But
Yeah, could be. I think there's less of that now, especially with the digital stuff, because so many people like their pencils, like they can just type pencil, but it's on the computer, so it's black and white already.
Hmm.
And all of the erasing and stuff that you get with the pencil is there to support those mistakes, that a penciler would be, crap, I want to erase that. But you can be doing it all in something that prints as black anyways. So I think that probably revolutionized that. I feel like there's so many artists now where I see that it's just their work, or even a lot of people that work as color, even as part of their process. They're drawing with colored lines, or they're drawing with blocks of color.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I just don't think that mentality, it probably doesn't even make sense to like the younger generation of artists, most of them. But I was always very penciler inker minded. Even though I loved finishing my stuff, I always inked it. As soon as I got a computer, I think we talked about me going down to Extreme Studios and seeing Photoshop for the first time. Did we talk about that on here?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, like as soon as I saw that, it was like I'm coloring all my own stuff. Like because I always wanted to see, I wanted it to look like a comic.
Right.
But pencils didn't look like a comic.
Right.
I don't think I ever bothered with lettering, but I had to finish it. So I would always just photocopy my pencils so I could show them the pencils. And then I like obsessively had to go ink it. Okay. Now I'm cheating with the brush, because he definitely did this all down here with the pen. Although there were parts in the book that were definitely brush, as we were mentioning yesterday. I don't know how he chooses when to switch over into that technique. It seemed to be for those very big emotional moments, like the big battle moments, he'd switch over to like that Frank Miller kind of dark black and white brushwork. By the way, it's something I'm interested in as I look at especially a lot of modern manga. There's such a history of like calligraphy and brushwork. I'm surprised that this like drawing versus painting or drawing versus calligraphic mark making is not something I associate with manga hardly at all, especially anymore. I mean, going back to this era a little bit more and previous to that a little bit more, but I'm surprised that hasn't maintained in their visual culture.
Well, some of that could be a matter of influence in terms of, Tezuya being influenced, I mean, basically being the father of the industry, and him being so influenced by the Dell Disney comics, which used, pen nibs. But part of it could also just be a matter of practicality, in that if you're working in an industry where many hands are involved in the creation of the stuff, a brush stroke, I think, and especially distinctive calligraphic strokes like that, I mean, are less easily imitatable by assistants, etc.
Maybe, but I almost feel like calligraphy has a like preset, even if you're doing calligraphy with the pen, there are preset forms that are pretty standardized that you would think there would be training programs, kind of like what I was talking about with what I've seen in Alex Raymond stuff, where I felt like they were all making the same marks, like everyone was making the same type of marks, and everyone kind of would apply them a little bit differently for their style. But like you would see guys that could come in and ape other guys' artwork fairly effectively for those comic strips. Like Al Williamson needs a break, Tom Yates steps in. It like to my eye, I can tell the difference, but I mean, I don't. Some of them were better at it than others, I think there was some kind of standard visual mark language, and I am surprised that that's not in the manga industry, at least in my exposure to it.
Well, faces and I mean, face structure tends to be genre specific. I mean, that's fairly close to a standard calligraphic shape that everyone employs. Triangle noses, you know. I mean, the sort of genre markers being actual style markers
Yeah, it's
is
just
close to
not
that
quite.
in a certain way.
It's just not quite the like. There's such a history of elegant mark making, and then the modern stuff, especially to me, looks very finicky
Right.
drawing, and none of that calligraphic elegance that I associate with all of the ink drawings. I know it's just weird. It's weird given their cultural history, the art. Maybe it's a rebellion against that, or
Well,
something
I
I've
think
been thinking about.
I've reached the end here of my time. I've got to go finish a painting.
Okay.
That's giant, but and I got to do it today. But looks great. I can't wait to see your finished one. And
Yeah, and I just finished. That's the finished. Boom, we're done.
nice.
Good
Looks.
timing.
I'm very excited to see them side by side.
Especially
And
this part.
yeah, exactly. The part where we totally departed from each other.
Yeah, that will be informative.
And especially to see it with the tone on top too, and to see like how different.
Yeah, if I send you mine, will you do the toning? Because I'm not sure I'm going to nail his tone exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tone him, but I think you're going to get.
Yeah, no
I think
problem.
you have a better sense of exactly what tone that was.
Yeah, I did it in Photoshop last time. I'll use it in I'll do it in Manga Studio this time, so we get a different technique.
Okay, sweet.
All
All right.
right, good to
Thank
talk
you,
to you, Carson.
sir. Yeah,
Thanks for
later.
listening, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate it.